eternal life, or mortal symbol. Contrasting mortal words to eternal life. Anything that could be labeled eternal must already be now and always. In contrast, with language, a particular story can be constructed about a specific past memory. Any single, isolated process is not eternal. In other words, anything that is ended cannot be eternal. Anything that is eternal cannot have ended. The past doesn't contain the eternal. We can't review the past and find the key to eternity. Language isolates and contrasts. Language divides reality into various identifiable distinctions, at least conceptually, things like past and future, now and not now. With language, a particular story can be constructed about a specific possibility for the future. Again, anything that is not already present cannot be eternal. Anything that is eternal cannot currently be absent. Can eternal life be achieved? If something is eternal, it is already present. Can eternal life be prevented? If something is eternal, it is already, always present, like inevitable. Language is a set of symbolic labels. Language forms, develops, and sometimes may pause. In the absence of the functioning of language, life is already present, always present, and eternally present. Eternally is a similar linguistic label to always. Eternal life is not the product of language, though the words eternal life are symbolic labels in language. Eternal life refers to something distinct from language, something prior to mortal identifications in words. Identifications or identities require language. Identifications are symbolic constructions in language and of language and by language. Identifications and the process of identifying are only possible through language. Prior to the development of language, there's no identifying, no labeling, no contrasting, no isolating. Past and future, as well as present, are labels in language. When linear language is functioning, the past can be contrasted from the future, the not yet. But any particular past is a construction in language. Any particular future is a construction in language. In fact, the future and the past, when constructed in language, are just possible constructions in language. Which part of the past is not construction with language? Even to answer the question requires language. Eternity does not require language. Eternity precedes the functioning of language. During the functioning of language, eternity remains. We could even say that eternity or eternal life does the functioning of language. Eternity is life. Life is eternity. Can life be achieved? Can life be prevented? Life is eternal. It is already present, always present, inevitably and unavoidably and eternally present. Can eternity be achieved? Can eternity be prevented? Eternity is alive now. It is always present, already present, inevitably, unavoidably, and presently present. Eternal life is what is present. There's no special language for achieving the eternal life that is always present already. There is no isolated linguistic identifying personality that achieves eternal life. Eternal life forms language, using language to contrast, to label, to isolate, to identify. And identifying in language is something that eternal life can do. Eternal life can create various identities, like in language. Those linguistic identities are like branches on a tree. Can the branches of the tree cancel the tree? Prevent the tree? Can the branches of a tree achieve the tree? The branches of the tree are already the tree. The linguistic identifyings formed by eternal life are like branches of a tree. The linguistic identifyings formed by eternal life are already eternal life. The tree is the more basic reality than the branches. The branches are mere formations of the tree. More precisely, branching is something that the tree does. Branching is one activity of the tree, like rooting or flowering. Branching. So likewise, identities are linguistic formations of eternal life. More precisely, linguistic identifying is something that eternal life does. Linguistic identifying and isolating, labeling, contrasting, etc. is the activity of eternal life, or one activity. Eternal life also trees and branches and roots and flowers. In the absence of the process of linguistic identifying, eternal life remains. In the presence of the process of linguistic identifying, eternal life remains. Life is eternal eternity. Language is the activity of life. Language is a formation done by life. Identities in language are formations done by life. Identifying in language is something that eternal life can do. Language is symbolic. Language is interpretation, interpretive. There's no such thing as a literal interpretation. Interpretations involve the use of linguistic symbols. There are no literal symbols or literal interpretations or literal metaphors or even literal identities. Identities are just constructions in language. Literally speaking, there's no such thing as a non-linguistic identifying. All linguistic identifyings are symbolic, figurative, interpretive, linguistic, poetic, metaphorical, mythological, and mortal. Identifyings constructed in language cannot be eternal. Identifying constructed in language must be mortal. Identifying constructed in language must be words. Words are mortal, not eternal. Identities are mortals. Mortals are linguistic identifyings, poetic, symbolic, figurative, interpretive, mythological, metaphorical. Mortals are just constructions in words. Mortal words are not eternal life. The words eternal life are not eternal life. All words, including the words eternal life, are just linguistic labels, symbols, poetry. The label eternal life is just one possible linguistic construction. The label eternal life is just another mortal. In some other language besides English, the one that is being used now by eternal life, some other label can refer to what is referenced by eternal life. Even within English, like in Latin, there would be different words. There would be aeternus vitale or whatever. So even with English, other labels can refer to what is referenced by eternal life, such as God, the universe, the unending universe, the omnipresent God, nature, creation, consciousness, Christ, the tree of life, the holy tree of life, limitless and boundless and all-inclusive, Catholic, in the original sense of the word Catholic. And even when we refer to the branches of the tree of life, that's still the tree of life. The branches are still the tree. The branches of the tree of eternal life are still eternal life. And also, all the linguistic labels created by eternal life, those are just more eternal life. Linguistic labels that figuratively isolate, that symbolically divide, that metaphorically contrast. Entirely valid formations of linguistic labeling. Interpretation. Poetry. So there are, however, a few linguistic labels that do not divide. For instance, who can name one thing that is not language? Language doesn't really divide. The word language doesn't reference a isolated particular thing. It's a big old category. Name one thing that is not language. Who can speak without language? Who can be spoken of without language? Who is just a formation of language, is just a mortal. What identity can be referenced without language? What linguistic identifying is not just a construction of symbolic poetry, of figurative interpretation, of metaphorical label? Are you a mortal constructed from words, or are you eternal life, which constructs mortals from words? If there is no linguistic answering constructed with words, like in the absence of linguistic answering constructed with words, are you still here? Am I still here even when the words come to a conclusion? In the pause between words, is eternal life still eternal life? Is living eternity still living eternity? Between the sounds of the words, can eternal life die? Can eternal life be reborn? When exactly was eternal life born? Before Abraham, I am. Before Jesus Christ, I am. When exactly are you not eternal? When exactly are you not alive as life itself? When exactly is a branch not the tree? When does a branch achieve being the tree, and how? When exactly is a symbolic mortal identifying in words not merely symbolic? How does a symbolic mortal identifying in words become eternal, become unsymbolic, become literally the actuality, rather than just a construction of language? When exactly does a symbolic mortal identifying in words achieve eternal life? How exactly does a branch achieve being a tree? How exactly does a symbolic mortal identifying in words achieve eternal life? A symbolic mortal identifying in words does not do anything. Eternal life does symbolic mortal identifying in words. A label doesn't do anything. A symbol doesn't do anything. A word doesn't do anything. A flowering doesn't do anything. Flowering just, you can say flowering flowers, but flowering is actually just a labeling of some isolated eternal life process. The eternal life process, the Tao, is indivisible, and language divides the indivisible symbolically, metaphorically, poetically, figuratively. However, literally, a flowering doesn't do anything. A breathing doesn't do anything. A melting doesn't do anything. A boiling doesn't do anything. A spinning around of the planet on its axis doesn't do anything. A revolving of a planet around a sun doesn't do anything. A shining of a sun doesn't do anything. Those are just linguistic labels. Language doesn't do anything. Language is a doing by eternal life. The same eternal life that does language does all the other stuff, the rooting and the branching and the spinning of the planeting and the shining of the shining, the melting, the flowering, the breathing, the boiling. All of those are entirely valid, symbolic, mortal identifyings in words. They begin and they end. They're mortal. They just don't do anything. They're like a cloud. You can label the cloud, oh, that's a stratophalactogagapatus cloud, but the cloud doesn't do anything. When the cloud drops raindrops out of it, the cloud didn't do anything. When the raindrop strikes the puddle and splashes, the raindrop didn't do anything. There's no life in the raindrop. There's no isolated life of the raindrop. There's no isolated life of the cloud. There's no isolated life of the mortal identifying in language. Eternal life does all of that. Kind of like a body does cells, and a planet, in this case an Earth, does mammals and plants and humans, and institutions and cities. Melting and breathing and flowering are entirely valid, symbolic, mortal identifying some words. They just don't do anything. God and Jesus Christ. Those are entirely valid, symbolic, mortal identifying some words. God, entirely valid. Jesus Christ, that's language. My future unborn great-grandchildren, that's a valid, symbolic, mortal identifying word. Santa Claus, that's a valid, symbolic, mortal identifying word. What does Santa Claus do? What are my future unborn great-grandchildren doing right now? What is God doing right now? What is Jesus Christ doing right now? Linguistic mortal identifyings of symbol don't do anything. They're just labels in language. God and Jesus Christ and my future unborn great-grandchildren and Santa Claus, they don't do anything. They're words. They're just labels in language. But what they reference, all the branches point back to the tree or the trunk, and really the whole of the tree. All of the mortal identifyings are the doings of eternal life. So we could say, well, when the branch flowers and twigs, and when the limb branches and then the branch buds, and when the bud flowers, well, that's all the tree doing. Tree. The mustard seed makes a mustard tree. Eternal life lives, does stuff, creates things, like language. A label does not do anything. A symbol does not do anything. A word does not do anything. A valid symbolic mortal identifying in language doesn't do anything. Eternal life makes labels and symbols and words. Eternal life can even construct nonsense linguistic formations like non-linguistic language or literal interpretation. Here's more nonsense. I am not just a symbolic mortal identifying in words. I am not just a symbolic mortal identifying in words. I am just a symbolic mortal identifying in words. How about that? I am just a symbolic mortal identifying in words. Isn't that nonsense? It is valid as a possible construction of language to say I am symbolic mortal identifying words, or I'm not just a symbolic mortal identifying words. But either way, it's figurative, symbolic, just metaphorical, just symbolic, just figurative, just linguistic. It doesn't matter if we call a branch or not, it's still a branch. It doesn't matter if we call eternal life just a symbolic mortal identifying words, or definitely not a symbolic mortal identifying words. It's like putting a label on a jar doesn't change the content of the jar. Taking the label off the jar doesn't change the content of the jar. Eternal life isn't affected or influenced by eternal life's use of language. the tree just branches. Eternal life uses language, so it can say, I'm not eternal life and I'm not using language. Or eternal life can say, I'm eternal life and I'm using language. Either way, that's just eternal life using language. So language is eternally symbolic, inevitably figurative, inherently metaphorical, poetic, intrinsically mortal. Eternal life, as a construction in language, the label eternal life, is also eternally symbolic, inevitably figurative, inherently metaphorical, intrinsically mortal. However, eternal life references that which constructs with language rather than some created construction of language. What created eternal life? Who created eternal life? When exactly was eternal life created? I create eternal life now. I did not do it in the past, and I will not do it in the future, because those are just labels in language, past and future. I am now, already, and always. I create eternal life. I am creating eternal life now. I did not ever start creating eternal life. I did not ever plan to eventually create eternal life and strategize over how to do it. I'm creating eternal life. I'm also creating entirely valid linguistic formations like achieving eternal life and preventing what is already present. And I am not just a symbolic, I am just a symbolic mortal linguistic identifying. No, I'm not. I'm not just a symbolic mortal identifying in language. Yes, I am. No, I'm not. That's all just stuff that I'm creating. They're entirely valid. Maybe nonsense, but they're. If you can understand the individual words and string them together, they make as much. They provide as much entertainment or as much directing of attention or as much directing of perception as they don't or do. Either one. What I say doesn't really matter. What eternal life labels on an empty jar doesn't change the empty jar to a full jar just because it has a label on the side of it. So, when eternal life talks about achieving eternal life and preventing what is already present, that's kind of like a tree saying, no, I'm not that branch. I'm only these branches over here. Or no, how about this? I'm not any of those branchings at all. I did not do that branch or any of the others either. I do not know how the branches got there or how the branching happened. It must have been the devil. It's just a random coincidence. That's it, yeah. Maybe those branches do not even actually exist. Maybe they are just constructions of your imagination. They're illusory. They're Maya. You, by the way, are definitely not me. You and I are inherently, intrinsically, and eternally isolated. Anyway, shouldn't you be trying to achieve eternal life? Recognize that eternal life forms linguistic identities. You are not a personal linguistic identifying, grafting to a branch, or receiving eternal life, or achieving eternal life, unless you are. Eternal life has always included all of its linguistic identities and symbolic formations. Like a tree always includes all of the branches and branchings. You are eternal life. However, you can say that you are not. You can say that you are only an isolated persona of linguistic identifying. You can say that you are only a believer. You believe in eternal life. You can say that you're only a branch, that you believe in the tree. You can say you're only an isolated persona of linguistic identifying. You can say, I am not eternal life. I can say, you are not eternal life. That's just something that eternal life can say. You can say, I can say. Like, certain words are the most important of all words. And if I just believe in those words, then I can eventually achieve eternal life. Saying that a branch is not part of the tree does not change that the branching is inherently just a function that the tree does. Saying that an isolated mortal persona of symbolic, figurative, poetic, linguistic identifying is not eternal life. That doesn't change that eternal life forms and uses language, logos. Eternal life does form and use language, saying things like, an isolated mortal persona is not eternal life. An isolated mortal persona of symbolic, figurative, poetic, linguistic identifying needs to be concerned with achieving eternal life and preventing what is already present. I'm going to read here from the first book of John in the Christian New Testament here. There's a couple images on the blog. In the beginning was the Word, Logos, and the Word was with God. Logos was with God, and the Word, Logos, was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by Him, and without Him not anything was made. It goes on. Skip to verse 14. And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. And we beheld His glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth, kind of like a branch of a vine that abides in me as I abide in you. There's lots of scriptures and Christian traditions, or other translations and traditions and languages. This sharing in language is informed by Christian tradition, Advaita, which could be considered part of the Hindu tradition, Buddhism, Zen, and the English language. Everything I've just said to you, except maybe for a couple words that I made up as I went, that was brought to you by the English language. One of the many languages of eternal life. It's not the best language, it's just one of them. It's like saying the best branch on a tree. English is this branch. English is this language. There are others. In fact, 2,000 years ago, English didn't exist. 2,000 years from now, English might not even exist. But language will outlast any individual language. And you know what will outlast all language? Eternal life. And that's what is here as the one speaking, the one listening, and all the other the ones. Eternal life or mortal symbol. Which do I say that I am? Both.